get permission to record. And there we go. Okay, we are on Films Gone Wild, and we're going to be talking about the film Bastards Road with producer and writer Mark Stafford. Mark, welcome to Films Gone Wild.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start this off. You introduce our audience to the film, assuming they haven't seen it as yet. Tell us what Bastards Road is about.
All right. Bastards Road is a documentary about Jonathan Hancock. He is a Marine Corps veteran that fought in the Battle of Ramadi in 2004 in Iraq. After that, he did numerous other tours overseas in counterintelligence before eventually getting out of the Corps in late 2009. Like a lot of guys that come home, it's a big struggle to adjust again. He went right back into school and tried as hard as he could, but in the matter of a couple of years, his life spiraled pretty badly out of control to the point where he was just drinking, constantly dealing with the PTSD and getting DUIs, and eventually attempted suicide. And he was just at the bottom. This is a guy that was as you can imagine what a Marine looks like. He was over 300 pounds when he got out of the hospital, and he was desperate to find a way to exist again. He came up with the idea. He had seen an inspiration for it. Someone had done something a little bit similar, and he had decided that he had this crazy idea. Screw it! I'm going to walk across the country. I'm going to try and figure out how to heal a little bit and process these things that are demons to me. So that's what he did. He got himself in immaculate Marine Corps shape again. He sold everything he could and kind of packed up a pack, and he started walking on September 11th, 2015. 15 months later, 6,000 miles later, he after zigzagging all around the country, he was almost always alone, but along the way he was visiting guys he served with, as well as Gold Star families of their fallen along the way too.
For me to describe this film for someone who's not seen it, I keep coming up with the word searing, because there's so much in it that's how hot it is to the touch emotionally. To watch John's journey and the conversations he has with the men he served with, that experienced this stuff with him, and to visit with the families that weren't there. I'm someone, I did not serve, and the respect that I have for those that did, it's almost like, I hate even the simple thing of referring to the men and women that serve as troops, because it's like, because the ability to just talk about numbers and not see the person, and not hear the person speak, like we do here. It's a gift, frankly, to be able to see that, and to be able to hear him talk, and to hear his fellow members talk. I would like you to talk about the fact, because you are credited as a writer on this, and oftentimes, we don't think about people being a writer on a documentary, because you're shooting footage, and then you put that footage together. Who's writing? It's not a script, right? And but for a documentary to be effective, there is writing that needs to be done, and and there is an outline, and there has to be a crafted story to take us from point A to point B to point C. So talk about that from your perspective as the person who was, as the writer, the architect of that.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you know, it's not that it's any different today than it ever was, 60, 70 years ago when documentaries started to be a thing. Um, it's just that today it's more a recognition of the fact that it's a very significant part of the process, writing a documentary, there is a lot of writing that's not super different than writing a narrative feature. In this instance, everybody's process is different, but when Brian was, calls me and he's like, "Hey man, got this crazy idea. Let's do this." And I'm like, "Hell yeah." We were into it right away. And after you get to know John, you're like, "Well, of course I want to do this." What I did at that point is he was feeding me footage all the time, tons of it. And I was watching it until my eyes bled. And, so I knew that the really first thing I needed to do was write a script, that was at that point, it was like a 50-page document that was my ideas about where the story could go as a finished product. And this was as raw as it gets in the beginning, but yeah, so I drafted this document over and over and over again, like you would a regular script. But, obviously with a documentary, one of the most beautiful things about documentary filmmaking is that you start out with ideas knowing that they're going to be thrown out. That you embrace that, because it's part of the beauty of documentary is that the footage tells you where to go if you're listening carefully. So you have to get so intimately familiar with the footage. If you have 100 hours of footage and you've watched all of it 10 times, that's a lot, but it gets you to the point where you really understand the possibilities of narrative arcs, where you really understand the directions things can go, So from that original document, Brian and I started meeting in a dark basement and yelling at each other for hours and hours and hours at a time until, we put together a cut that was at one point like about 2.5 hours long. And that, we took a ton of cuts to get to that point. And I would go back and do more and more writing, and we would tweak it and this and that and everything. But we actually took that cut down to a Memorial Day event with a family of one of the fallen, and showed it to a bunch of the guys that John had served with, just them. We got a theater that let us do it, and we wanted to get their raw reactions to it. So that's what we did. And it was a great experience. But I can tell you what happened is that Brian and I's eyes, the first time you sit in a theater with something that's put together, doesn't matter how many times you've seen it, when you see it with other humans around you, it's a different thing. And we ended up, of that 2.5 hours, we probably threw away at least an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And we ended up doing a whole bunch of new stuff with those guys and with other stuff to add to making it pop. And so the finished product was very, very different. At that, we finally decided how we wanted to start the film. Took us a while to get to that point, and it was kind of like an aha moment at one point. And the end, like all films, is always a struggle to kind of pull those elements together and make sure you're saying what you want to say at the end, and allowing the subject to really be the center, which they need to be. We wanted this to be a human story where we don't ever lose too much focus on the fact that this is about John, and about him being this incredibly unique vessel, outwardly gregarious and funny and insightful and heartfelt and, hurting like hell, but all these things at once. And that's the searing part you're talking about. That roller coaster that we eventually discovered needed to be what punches people in the gut.
Right. Well, here's the, I want to talk about one particular moment also, because reality television has forever influenced how we make documentaries and how audiences watch documentaries. And there's one moment in this film where, uh, as the filmmakers, you show John footage from an interview you've done with someone else. And I don't want to ruin them all. I don't want to, as a spoiler, not that documentaries really have spoilers, but, I don't even want to let on past that. And I want you to talk about the decision to do that. And, the decision to try that as a device, as a storytelling device. And then if it worked out the way that you and Brian wanted it to work out.
Yeah. So the scene you're talking about, yes, Brian made that decision. He was out there doing that interview, and this was towards the end of the walk, and John, he knew him and John had gotten very, very, very close, and so there was enough there for Brian to take that risk, but it was a big one, but I think that he felt like John himself wanted that to be a part of the arc. And, I think he kind of intuitively felt that, and he decided, like, all right, we're going to do this, because even though it kind of, I don't know, breaks a rule or whatever you want to call it, it's going to allow him to process things. And this movie is about processing things that are very difficult to process, and not, it's really just about being a human being that's going through stuff. So confronting him with that, which is really what we're doing, right, is saying, look, man, this is kind of what you did to somebody. You need to see that, because, and we knew that he was capable of it, right? I mean, John is deeply insightful, very eloquent. He's, no matter how he may react to something at first, he'll step back and come back to you with a lot of insight, a lot of self-awareness.
He's an interrogation specialist, so it's like, it's like to have that capacity, within you, then you have to have the self-awareness and insight, and to be able to have it self-directed. And so I think
The Walk did that to him. I'm telling you, The Walk did that to him. Without The Walk, without like meandering around the country for 6,000 miles and exhausting every physical and mental and spiritual part of yourself, I don't know that he would have gotten to that point, to be honest with you. I honestly believe it took that, and he instinctively kind of knew that in the beginning, that he needed to do that to survive, to kind of tear himself down. But you're right, man. You're right. Like, to think of the fact that somebody, if all of us can imagine at least a little bit what it would take to be that kind of person, right? You have to completely compartmentalize every other aspect of your life to be able to do that job. So to come home and try and function in a normal world and not do that to other people, and have yourself still completely shut down, you can imagine how hard it would have been, John, to get to the point to be on the other side of that table. Because he's doing it to himself. He's interrogating himself. That's really what, at the end of the day, this film ends up kind of being.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, again, if in many, many, many situations, that could have derailed the film, frankly, taking that shot.
That's what a risk is.
But again, like I said, this was a case where, in the context of the arc of the film, of what you and Brian had crafted, it did work, and it not only was effective, but I think more importantly, it was appropriate. And I think that does go. I think all the credit to that actually does go to John, as a person, as someone who could absorb that and absorb it like a body blow, like a gut punch.
Yeah.
And still let the font of reels come forth. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about was, again, again, as a producer and a writer, oftentimes the approach is you build out this outline and then you supply footage or interviews to fortify the points that you thought you were going to make or hope to make or whatever. And in this case, of course, you don't know exactly where the journey is going to lead. Yes, you have an idea, it's going to go 6,000 miles. We're going to end up in Pendleton, Fort Pendleton, and what have you, but you don't know exactly. So there is a mystery to that. But there's also a moment where you're looking at the footage that Brian is getting. Brian is getting that footage, that you see a moment, an interview, whatever footage, and you go, that's the movie. That's what the whole point of this whole goddamn thing was. This moment, what was the movie? And maybe it's a couple moments, and maybe you didn't know it until you saw it in the editing bay. But I would love for you, Brian might have a different answer, but for you personally, what was that moment, or what were those moments that for you said, this is why we're doing this?
I would say that, and this kind of overlaps with what I was saying a little bit earlier, but when we tore that first cut down, that and not started over, but kind of felt like it. We did a bunch of interviews with guys that opened up avenues, and a lot of this ended up in the film, that we hadn't gotten to before. And I think figuring out that we had to take risks that we knew were going to feel like risks. One of them we just talked about. Another one was starting the film the way we started it. We knew that was, almost like throwing a knife at somebody right away. But we had to do it because we felt like this was going to be visceral, man. This had to be, because we were trying to build a bridge to civilians. This is, John himself has said numerous times, like, as incredibly important as this is for veterans, it's almost more important for civilians, because there's too big a gap in understanding right now. There's too many walls that are built up between the groups. And so when you throw those daggers and kind of say, look, this is real, just sit in this, sit by that fire and listen to this. And then walk away from this and tell me that you are at least a little bit embarrassed / ashamed that you haven't been more patient or understanding in your life, or tried to figure out things you've never tried to figure out before. Have you tried to walk in somebody else's shoes enough? Most of us don't most of the time. We're all like that. And I think those moments were really game changing for me. Like, I just feel like there were a few others in the creation process as well. Like, I write fiction novels as well. And like, I a lot of ways there, it's not as different as you think. Like, I really approach it as almost like a circle that you have to allow yourself to be in. You have to write and then allow the product to write back at you, and then kind of keep going and allowing it to keep forming you as you're forming it. And the documentaries are a lot like that, because you're dead on. Like, okay, great, here's your plans, great, yeah, those are gone after 10 minutes, because John tells you things that go this way, and that's just the reality, and you have to follow that. You have to have the courage to do that. And in the creative process, I think there were so many fun moments in between Brian and I yelling at each other that we were like, oh, holy crap, this is actually going to work here. There's a sequence in the film where you hear a lot of his brothers talk in, I don't know, whatever it is, 5 to 10 minute period, about their own really visceral, personal, like, feelings about PTSD. Constructing that was a breakthrough for us, because it came later in the game, and it became the real bridge we needed to make. Because as much as you want the film to center on John, you needed it to be about the people that were being around him affected and all this other stuff. And finally figuring out how to put that together, those are the moments that you kind of feel like, as a filmmaker, like, I actually did something, you know.
Right.
I actually might have communicated something. Because that's what we want to do, right? I mean, like we want things that make people think a little bit in a way that maybe they haven't before. At
Right.
least, at least for me, that's all it is.
No, I think you're absolutely correct, and that's the thing. Like, talking about, like, watching a film that you've made with those first, groups that you put together. Because usually on this level, it's not a studio focus group. It's like some friends and friends of friends, or what have you, and then you watch that. And yeah, and and if it's fiction, then it's like, are they laughing at the right places, or or am I sensing boredom in places? And in a film like this, it's like, did I lose them in moments? Am I going to get? When did we get them back? And that's where I think then you start chopping segments out of it. But it comes to that thing of as a storyteller, using your power for good. Right. And then you go, okay, in this case, I got tears, or I delivered that gut punch to somebody, or I made someone laugh, or what have you, or I sensed the nods of understanding and appreciation, that non-spoken, thing that again, you, as a filmmaker, you're looking for those cues in the crowd, and you pick them up like you're hypersensitive to them, right?
Yep. Oh yeah, man. You got to be. You have to be. I mean, because you become so in tune to yourself, and there's nothing but a hollow abyss in there after a while. I mean, like you sit in that dark room and you talk to each other and blah 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 blah. But after a while, it's just all nothingness, and you have to find your way out of that so you can get back into it. And that was that was a huge thing for us, because that audience at that time was all veterans or families of veterans, and maybe a couple other random people. But when we put together the first cut that started to resemble what the film would actually be, Brian and I started showing it to different people in our lives, friends, families, anybody that would, we wanted to get different demographic viewpoints. And that helped a lot too. I mean, that really was what that feedback really took us to the point where we were like, okay, these are the things we have to do now to make this really what it's going to be. And it was eventually that we got to the final cut by after the veteran audience, then going to the civilian audience, and really getting feedback and doing all that. It just, man, it's a long journey.
Well, listen, it was literally a long journey for him on the walk. It's a long journey for anybody making a freaking film in the first place. But man, the journey is so worth it in this case. It just, again, it nailed me to the wall. And it will for anyone, it will. Again, the film is Bastards Road. We've been talking with the producer and writer, Mark Stafford. Mark, again, congratulations so much. And thank you so much for talking to us about the movie.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.